Good morning, year four. Oh my goodness, it feels like ages since I've read this book and caught up with you all. So I thought I'd better come on and read the next chapter at least. So we've got to where we found out Max Ernest knows Dr. Ella Ms. Marvey. Now, Cass was going to dinner and Max Ernest was a special guest. So I wonder what's going to happen. So we're on chapter 24 and it's called Dinner. Even Cass, who was feeling slightly less sick, but all the more upset about the situation in which she found herself, had to admit the dinner table looked magnificent. It was covered with a cloth sewn entirely of crimson flower petals, each petal lush and perfect, and not a bit bruised or ripped. On this luxurious crimson bed sat a dozen crystal candlesticks of varying heights, as well as numerous glittering urns and patterns of exotic oriental design. Each place setting came with a pair of gleaming golden chopsticks and ornate sets of silverware, tiny forks, oddly curved, spoons, needle-like knives, that had the look of ancient surgical instruments. On the whole, the table looked less like a dinner table than a shrine to some jealous and demanding god. This effect was only heightened when the kitchen staff began to bring the food. So solemnly and silently they might have been making offerings in a temple rather than serving dinner. Indeed, whenever a new dish appeared, Miss Marvey described it with an almost religious reverence. The base of this custard is the rendered cartilage of a tiny marsupial that lives under rocks on an island in the South Pacific, she said on the first course, which arrived in individual thumb-sized serving cups. Excellent source of calcium, also prized by fishermen for the waterproofing properties. I do hope you aren't vegetarians. The pale blue dust you see is pollen from a flower that blooms only at the elevation of 3,000 metres and only after a very long winter, she said, about the topping on a roll that looked like a powdered doughnut, but which was anything but sweet. Some indigenous people believed it sharpened the intellect. Certainly, it is very helpful in clearing sinuses. Bear liver, sautéed in codfish oil, she announced, when the particularly unattractive lump arrived in front of each dinner. A dish beloved by the Vikings, the reason they could survive so long in the cold. You may find it a little gamey. Before they ate any given dish, Cass and Max Ernest were instructed to close their eyes and smell it. Remember, what you experience as taste is mostly scent, said Miss Marvey. By itself, the tongue can only identify 4 flavours. Or is it 5? 5, replied Dr. L. I believe scientists recently discovered a taste for fat. After smelling their food, they were to examine it closely from all angles, so as to appreciate any subtleties of colour and shape. Should we listen to it too? Asked Max Ernest, who was clearly hanging on Miss Marvey's every word. Well, that depends on whether your dish is making any noise, doesn't it, sweetheart? She responded. Why don't you give it a try? Obediently, Max Ernest tilted his head towards the plate. Across the table, Cass rolled her eyes in disgust. Despite her rapturous descriptions, Miss Marvey, Cass noticed, didn't eat for the most of the meal. She merely sipped from a tall glass of red wine. At least Cass assumed it was wine. It was the right colour, but it looked disturbingly thick. The one dish Miss Marvey ate was the last. It consisted of a small quivering mass that pulsed intermittently like a heart. It was served only to her, and she did not describe it like she had the others. Instead, she spared it suddenly and violently with a chopstick and swallowed it whole. As Miss Marvey sighed in satisfaction, Cass thought she detected a new vibrancy in her hostess's pale white cheeks. I have a sensitive stomach, Miss Marvey explained. There are very few things I can eat, and they have to be very, very fresh. Oh, I'm worried what she was eating there. After their plates had been cleared, Miss Marvey focused her attention on her guests. Now, my darling young people, I wonder if you know what you have in that notebook. Did you peek inside at all? No, we didn't, said Cass before Max Ernest could say otherwise. I don't know exactly what's in it myself, but I fear the worst, said Miss Marvey. You see, Pietro was a dear, dear friend, but I'm afraid he was quite ill. Mentally, I mean. Mentally? You mean he was crazy? It didn't seem like it, said Cass defensively. She felt somehow as though she was being personally insulted. Oh, so you did read it then? Cass reddened, not saying anything more. "Your ears, my dear. Think about my offer," said Miss Morvay in a sing-song tone. "But yes, to answer your question, I'm sad to say he was totally delusional. He had this imaginary friend, a twin brother, whom he invented as a child. He made up this incredible story about this brother being snatched away from the circus when they were boys." At this, Cass and Max Ernest couldn't help glancing at each other. "I see you're familiar with this story." "That's what I was afraid of." It was very vivid for him, but for most of his life he knew it was a fantasy. Only in his later years did he begin to really believe it. "Are you quite well, Doctor?" asked Miss Morvay, addressing Dr. L, who had remained remarkably quiet ever since he had brought up the notebook. His face looked tight, as though he might be choking on something, but he waved off her concern. "I'm fine," he said, covering his mouth with a napkin. "Well then," Miss Morvay continued, "when I suggested to Pietro that his brother didn't exist outside his imagination, he became violent. He actually accused me of being the one to steal his brother, if you can believe that. It didn't seem to occur to him that I was much too young to have been alive when he was a child." Miss Morvay chuckled and touched her forehead. "Much too young," she repeated. Could that be true? Wondered Cass. Was Max Ernest right about Miss Morvay? Had she judged her too harshly? Just because Miss Morvay was a bit chilly and strange, or because, Cass remembered this for some reason, Max Ernest had only said Miss Morvay was the prettiest woman he'd ever seen. Was she jealous? Was that all it was, all along? "Then why do you want the notebook so badly?" Cass asked, scrambling to climb out of the mental rabbit hole into which she was falling. "If it's all made up." "Because we don't want it to get into the wrong hands. Because we loved Pietro, and we want the world to remember him at his best, not some crazy person." The more Cass thought about it, the surer she became that she wasn't sure of anything. She had no proof that the magician had written what the magician had written had really happened. No proof that Miss Morvay was involved in Luciano's disappearance. No proof even that Miss Morvay was involved in Benjamin Blake's disappearance. For all Cass knew, Benjamin Blake was already back home, safe and sound, and there'd been no reason at all for her to come save him. In her agitation, Cass banged the table and accidentally knocked the wine glass out of Miss Morvay's hand. The glass flew into the air and spilled. I'm going to assume that's because that felt like slow motion. Excuse my dog having a bit of a bark in the background. You know those frozen in time moments in life when you suddenly turn into a kung fu movie and you see everything in slow motion? The glass was in the air for less than a second, but that second was long enough for Cass to think 1,000 things, and to realise why the sight of Miss Morvay's wine had disturbed her earlier. 2 words. Monkey blood. Was it monkey blood? To be frank, I don't know. Some rumours are just rumours. In any event, Cass was about to be greeted by a sight far more disturbing than a glass of blood. "Here, let me put you back in the scene, in real time this time." The glass flew into the air and spilled. Wine, blood, elixir, who knows? I won't delay any longer. Out in an arc, splattering all over one of Miss Morvay's long, creamy, white gloves. "You clumsy girl!" Fury passed in a blush over Miss Morvay's face as she yanked off her glove. "This was my favourite pair. I bought them at the Paris flea market over 90 years ago." She stopped speaking, following her guest's eyes with her own. Gloria stifled a gasp. Everyone was staring at Miss Morvay's hand, ungloved for the first time. It was the hand of someone, of something else, with fingers so thin and frail you could almost snap them off, with nails so yellow and cracked they were claws, with skin so translucent you could see every bone, every ligament, every vein. It was the hand of an old woman, a very old woman, an older woman than Cass had ever seen. Oh my goodness me. The next chapter is called Prisoners. I'm going to have to read this very soon. My goodness. See you soon.